Hey folks, welcome back. This is Andy with the Poor Proles Almanac. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can find us on Patreon if you're enjoying what we're doing here and you'd like to help us cover the costs of hosting the podcast. We don't explicitly offer any of our traditional content focused on the specific goals of this podcast to our Patreons in terms of limited access or anything like that right now. Knowledge is for everyone, but we have started up a Patreon-only mini-series called The Prologues, during which we do some various critiques on ecological subject matters. We've also included clips of this entire series up on the Patreon as well, so if you want to hear stuff from all of the episodes, go check it out. We've also released one episode that was asked for by popular demand for public consumption, so that's a good place to check it out and see if you'd like to hear more. On top of this content, we've got stickers available, and we're including some footage from my farm, putting the theory we're talking about into practice. So if you want to see what's going on over there, check out the Patreon. Any support we can get to offset our actual costs, we fully and wholeheartedly appreciate. So if you can, go check it out. We're also on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to follow us over there.
So in this episode, we're talking with Patrick Farnsworth from Last Born in the Wilderness. Patrick has spent the past few years building his catalog of interviews with some renowned guests that you've probably heard of if you listen to our podcasts. He tackles the same subject matter we do on the Poor Proles Almanac, but we will admit with a more deeper focus on the psychological and collective impacts on humanity in regards to collapse, climate change, and all sorts of isms that we go over in this conversation.
In our talks with him, we try to pair these two different perspectives or different focuses into one cohesive conversation between what he's been doing and how that plays into a lot of the focuses that we've been focused on, which is around the idea of how do we rebuild and what does that collapse look like and how do we deal with it. So that's kind of where the conversation ends up going.
Yeah, maybe just try to absorb and see where the conversation took us.
Yeah, so if you do enjoy the conversation, go check out his podcast, Last Born in the Wilderness. Please go support his work. It's really great, and it was a really big inspiration for this podcast. So hopefully you enjoy this conversation. So hi, Patrick. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. I've been a long-time listener of yours. Last Born in the Wilderness was actually one of the first podcasts that I'd ever really listened to. I was never really into podcasts until about a year and a half ago, so this was, I don't even remember where I found it, but it sounded interesting to me, and it's, I guess, no surprise that it, translated into this podcast that we're doing. And it brings up a lot of these really important conversations that I don't think we're really spending a lot of time talking about, specifically for what you're doing, the psychological impacts and the long-term acceptance of climate change and ultimately climate collapse. What got you into that topic and kind of what propelled it into what it is today in terms of the podcast?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. And like you said before we start recording, I'm the one usually asking the questions. So it's good to challenge myself in this way to, answer some questions instead. So anyways, thank you. I'm really a fan of your work too. So thank you for what you said. And it is flattering to hear that people listen to my work and that inspired them to do their own thing too. So that's great. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. Everybody has their moments when they kind of come across the disturbing information surrounding climate change and the state of the planet regarding like the ecologies and the biosphere as a whole. And I don't know, I guess I was in my early 20s. I'm like in my early 30s now. So this is about a decade ago. I'd already become fairly politicized, reading a lot of leftist theory and about U.S. foreign policy and imperialism and getting into sort of an anti-capitalist perspective on things. So I was already in that space. And I guess I had sort of been aware, everybody was becoming aware of climate change. I mean, I don't know, 2006 was when like Al Gore's documentary came out, right? And of course, it's ridiculous to look at it now because it's like he's a billionaire, he's a very wealthy guy, ran for president and was a vice president and all that, but he brought that subject to the forefront of people's minds in at least the English-speaking world. And of course, the solutions were now, again, looking at it now, it seems so ridiculous and trite. Like, get some better, more efficient light bulbs, I don't know, make better decisions as a consumer. And it's nothing really radical about any of that. It was just like, be better at, just be more conscious of how you're spending your money. Like that was all it really was. And so I think I had kind of been thinking about that, but I hadn't really interrogated that too much in my thinking yet. But then I did come across a more comprehensive view of climate disruption and the concept of like tipping points and feedback loops, and how the planet had already risen by well over 1 degree centigrade or Celsius since the pre-industrial era. So over 200 years, or a little over 200 years, we've seen just a 1 to 1.5 degree rise in temperature. And they were already saying like, okay, well, there's certain things already locked in. We already have this much heat that we're able to measure, but much of that heat has been trapped in the oceans. We have over 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. And certain feedback loops have already been triggered. So we can expect more heating to happen regardless of whether we stop emitting carbon right now. If we were just to stop right now, that would be great, but we should expect at least another 2, 3, or 4 degrees of warming over the next several decades. And then you start to realize that the things that were being predicted by the IPCC or other intergovernmental bodies or other, international bodies of scientists and so on, that the predictions they had about ice loss in the Arctic or the Antarctic, or the loss of ice and with glaciers, or all of these things that are like canaries in the coal mine. And they say, oh, well, we don't project that to really be happening until, I don't know, maybe several decades from now. Some of the stuff they predicted would happen in 2070 is happening now. Mm-hmm. So it's like the common thing you hear in news articles that are reporting on the climate is like faster than previously expected. Like that's just the common thing that you hear over and over again. So the signal is we are rapidly changing, the industrial system is rapidly changing the climate system. And what does that mean to live on a planet that is several degrees warmer than where we are currently? What does it mean to live on a planet that is changing that rapidly? What does it mean for other life on the planet to undergo such a rapid change as well? Mm-hmm. And of course, the concept of the Anthropocene, of the sixth mass extinction, comes up on that. When you start to research that, you start to recognize that we're undergoing a massive cataclysmic shift on this planet right now. And what does that mean to exist within the context of a global capitalist system? What does that mean to exist within a nation state such as the United States, or any other like global, any of the other nation states that exist globally right now? You start to think about this. And so I started to have these thoughts and this information come into my mind when I was in my early 20s. And I think inevitably you have almost an existential crisis when you start to really like think about that. Like,
yeah, been there.
It's that holy shit moment. You're like, okay, now what do I do with that information? And I didn't know what to do with that information, and it was hard to talk to other people about it around me that was in my vicinity, my friends or my family. So I did start the podcast around that time, but I was a very unfocused and unsure what to do with myself at that time. Didn't know how to like channel my passion or my whatever gifts or skills I had at that time into something. And then I would say about 4 years ago, something clicked, and I just decided I needed to take a few risks. It's a very real thing to feel that, what they call it, imposter syndrome. Because I'm not a college. I didn't do well in school. I dropped out of high school. I've been depressed most of my teenage and into my 20s years, right? Like I just felt like I'm not qualified to be talking about these things or to be putting out a podcast about these subjects. But something clicked. I don't know what happened. Something shifted in my life at that point, and I just decided, I need to buy microphones. I need to get some recording equipment. I need to figure out how to interview people, and I need to just take the risks to put myself out there and know that I'll make mistakes along the way, but that's okay, and that's a part of the process. So anyway, that's pretty much how it started. Is I just felt like I needed to know that I'm not alone. I needed to know that other people were thinking about these things as well. And I just am a very curious person. And so it became Last Born in the Wilderness as it is today.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story. It seems your curiosity for the subject matter that you're, passionate about. It didn't seem like the answers were readily available. It seemed like the answers at the time weren't even all that accurate, because you talk about how the planet warms, 1 degree Celsius. And it's not so much that the planet is warming. That's the issue with climate change. It's the rate at which it's warming. So you talked about how rapid it was. And that's something that a few years ago, I feel people would have conflated the two. And they are different, but even having that basic understanding of what climate change actually is super important. And so, I mean, that's where you started and sort of went down a rabbit hole. And the work that you've done, just starting on those surface topics, it's brought a lot of things to light that, like you said, you're not alone. Like, I've had those thoughts too. I'm just glad you've done the work and had the conversations, because I don't have to stay up at night thinking about, am I going crazy, or do other people feel this way too?
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, you and I've had so many people reach out to me and send me sometimes it's overwhelming how sweet people are and how much people really want to share, how meaningful it is. Like, the internet's a weird fucking place for so many reasons, but you put a thing out there and you don't know how it's going to land. And then when some stranger who you'll probably never meet in real life sends you one of the most heartfelt things that you've read about, oh, I listened to this episode and now I don't feel alone anymore in this. I don't even know how to respond to that adequately. I try my best. I really do. But like, God, like that's a lot. And it means a lot to me that people are willing to reach out and say that to me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think the first, for me, experience with the podcast, like translating in that kind of way, was when we had recorded a couple episodes, and I was like, oh, if like 10 people listen to this, I'll be shocked. Like, how are they going to find it? And, you get like one message, and it's like you said, somebody's like, I listened to this and it like changed my entire thinking about, like, our first episode. They're like, it changed my entire thinking about climate change and kind of humanity's role in it and what our response should be. It's just like the imposter syndrome piece. Like, if you feel like you're winging it, and people listen and they're like, no, that makes so much sense, and it validates how you feel. And also, like you said, there's really no words to describe that feeling of somebody else having that kind of response to what you've done. And it's a really weird thing, podcasts.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah, and putting our media out over the internet, like you were saying, the internet is a crazy place. There's a whole lot of negativity and fraud and a whole lot of imposters and trolls and all sorts of things out there. But when we do make those connections with people, it's a human connection that feels strange, because it comes through, a computer screen. Like you said, you're never going to meet them face to face, but you and that other person know that you connected over whatever concept or conversation that was had, and you can always have that.
Yeah, well, I just think the nature of the topics that I'm talking about and you're talking about on your podcast, on this podcast, it's like, if you can find other people that are resonating with that message, that bond is really strong. So there are people that I really love, that I've become very good friends with, that I probably won't ever meet in real life because of that, right? Because if you can't find other people in your geographical location that you can talk to about these things with, then you're going to find other people in other ways. And the internet, with all of the issues that it has, obvious issues, it is a medium for communication, and putting out a podcast is sort of like throwing out a signal, like, and it is weird. Like, I think that feeling you have when you're having a great conversation with somebody, you can get that same feeling from listening to a podcast, but it's a little one-sided, right? So people will know a lot about you, but you don't know anything about them. So there's this weird type of familiarity that's there. So people were like, I know so much about you, Patrick, but I'm like, I've never met this person before. Right. And it's kind of interesting. And I don't know, it's sort of uncharted territory for, I think, human beings, but here we are.
Yeah, it's like the celebrity status without all the other things that come with celebrity status.
Yeah, and you just gave me permission to call myself a pioneer, so I'm taking that title. That sounds cool as shit. Put it on my resume.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, put it on your CV. That's
Uncharted
good.
territory, people.
Right.
We're doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you've had all these different people, and I don't want to simplify your podcast, but I would say it's pretty focused on climate change and the role of capitalism and colonialism within climate change. So, having interviewed all these people, you're up to what, 180-ish episodes at this point, I think?
No, I'm
I was
actually around
260.
No, I'm actually around. I just released 295.
Oh, wow.
295, man.
Okay, I don't know
I
what
mean,
I'm
I will
talking
say
about.
like some of those episodes got taken down, and the first I don't know. There's a whole story there, but the whole point is I've technically done 295 episodes at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you probably know better than I do. That's a lot of editing. So what did it feel like to kind of get this affirmation when all of these different people were kind of saying, no, you're not crazy. These are real problems. And in some cases, they're a lot worse than even you think.
I mean, it really the affirmation is great, and there is that sense of also like it's actually worse than you may have even thought. And part of the way you mentioned the intersections between colonialism and capitalism and these things. So my view of like collapse has changed over the years, and my view of climate disruption has changed because I realized, because I think there's this reductive quality when we talk about climate change, which is fine sometimes, which is just saying like carbon emission from industrial activity is warming the planet. But it's more than that. And it's like, what are the systems that produce the conditions to begin with? And so that's where you dig into questions about capitalism. And then you figure out where did that come from? Well, there's settler colonialism. Well, what did that produce? And it's just like this onion that you have to peel back, and you realize like that's why I talk about race so much, or the issue of white supremacy so much, because I don't think any of this shit would have happened without white supremacy, to be honest with you. Or, all of like capitalism produces the certain conditions to that exploit the environment. So even without climate change, let's just say climate change wasn't even a part of the picture. Let's say that wasn't even something that was looming over us constantly. We're still undercutting all the living systems of the planet through industrial expansion, the ways that agriculture, decomplexifies our environments, taking really biodiverse regions that support countless life forms to basically supporting like 2 or 3. And that's basically what modern agricultural projects do. It takes a rainforest or takes some other piece of land that has really complex ecosystems, and then it's like, let's turn that piece of land to just grow like soy or corn or some other crop so that we can then raise cattle to then feed human population. So there's like 3 organisms that are benefiting from that. Benefiting, I use quotations around that. So it's like even without climate change, the collapse that we're anticipating that is unfolding is happening for numerous reasons. So I guess like being exposed to different people who are coming at this subject from so many different angles exposed me to the complexity of the situation, and that it felt very good to be affirmed that, things are quite, it feels strange to say that it feels good to be affirmed in knowing that things are as bad as they really are. But it does help you feel like I'm on a good path here. I'm not crazy, if I use those words, crazy. I don't feel, because sometimes you feel like you're out of line.
Right. And I think, right. And I think it's not the affirmation of, knowing things are bad. I feel like it's the affirmation of knowing you're in the right place to start, attacking the problem rather than, being in the wrong position mentally or just coming at it from the wrong approach, the wrong angle.
Yeah. Well, and also it's like something that I've really tried to push back against in my own way is misanthropy, which is when people blame humanity for all of these problems, as if like human beings as a species is responsible for all of this. Like there's something intrinsically wrong with human beings, Homo sapiens, and not looking at the broad scope and diversity of human beings, human cultures, human societies that have existed for as long as we've existed as a species, and just thinking like, oh, there's just something rotten with us and that we deserve our extinction, which is not how I approach it at all. And I think that it's it's really just fucking racist because you're excluding indigenous peoples and all of these other groups of people that have lived on their land bases for thousands and thousands of years and have actually lived in a regenerative capacity, they've had a reciprocal relationship that they've developed with the ecologies of the land that they are on. And so when I think about, like, regardless of what happens in the future, if we're going to have anything that allows us to continue to survive, it's going to be reclaiming those things. It's going to be living within that framework of reciprocity and regeneration. So yeah, that's the thing that I guess that I've recognized in doing my work is knowing what the enemy really is. It is not human beings. It is systems. It is ways of thinking. It's thought forms. It's a life-destroying culture that whether we didn't mean, I didn't choose to be born in this time as much as you two weren't choose to be born in this time in the bodies that we were all born into. But we have to, like, reckon with the realities that we are a part of, and then we have to make the choices that we can based on that. And so there's something griefful in that as well. There may be a lot of emotions that come up when we recognize where we really are right now in all of this. But we have to take, I guess, some responsibility as human beings and decide what to do with that information.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're stating that you're an agent to solve these problems and to do it with all inclusion, like everybody's included. I think a lot of people do say, like you said before, with sort of some cynicism, they want to reclassify humans as a parasite or, something that has a negative connotation. And you're right. I don't think that really applies. I think there can be an all-inclusive way forward, but that inclusivity is going to change, the way people see other humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really ties down to this idea of understanding the human role in ecology, which we've been so far removed from. It's allowed for a lot of, consumable forms of naturalism that are easily accessible, and they've really sprung up in the last 10 years or so as kind of like, I almost want to call them like false prophets around like this idea of like, we can apply these ideas of ecology to our farming systems, and we don't really have to change much. And it ignores the fact that that's not how ecology works. We can't just change a couple things and the system just gets tweaked a little bit and we can fix our food system. It's a good way to stave off the collapse for a little while, but it's not really a solution. It's buying some time. But we do need to do a lot of that soul searching, and we see this, for example, a lot of right now in California, there's a lot of work being done to try to work with indigenous cultures and slash and burn to manage for fires and things like that. But we can't just piecemeal something like that in where those groups are now going to be involved in managing the land, but it's only for a month every couple of years or whatever it is. That's the capitalist mindset of, we can kind of plug and play and all we have to do is just enough so that the ecology doesn't fully collapse. And it's going to take some time and thoughtfulness to come to some real meaningful and likely drastic changes.
Right. And so I guess that'll bring me to my next question. At the beginning, I'm not sure if we were recording, but we were talking about Al Gore bringing up climate change back in the early 2000s and how that was a new concept at the time, and how the solutions he had seemed they are ineffectual, but what they really were was just incremental changes from normal everyday life. That wasn't anything earth-shattering.
Some small tweaks are going to fix everything.
Right. And I feel like that's the kind of approach that seems to be applied with people trying to upgrade industrial agriculture with this small-scale ecological approach that's sort of supposed to be the Band-Aid that fixes everything. Where do you see the future where people aren't getting, the shock from the changes that are going to need to be made? Because you talk about climate change and people automatically think, that you're going to make them live in a treehouse and use leaves instead of toilet paper and all of these crazy changes. How do you turn the information that you have about collapse into bite-sized information that normal, I guess, for lack of a better word, normal people can consume and actually do something about?
I guess it depends on the person I'm interviewing. So sometimes it's like this almost like big brain kind of perspective, like a meta perspective. Like, let's look at this broad thing that's happening and like look at it from that perspective. And then I'll have people on that are like, let's just talk about like basic skills that you can have to, I don't know, like learn, like, I don't know. Someone I interviewed was like Emma Catherine. She lives in the UK and she does a lot of like I guess you can call it witchcraft, but a lot of it just is like, if you've read her stuff, it's just, I don't know, there's something really soothing about her work, because it's like, this is how you make broth. This is how you go out and find, like, how you forage, find basic things that you can cook with. She talks about self-defense. She talks about like all these really practical skills that, the average working person may feel like they can't do, which, some of that's true, but a lot of it's not. A lot of it's just because we're exhausted and we just don't know what to do, and we've believed that we have to just, go buy takeout, and that's the easiest way to feed ourselves. But she really just tries to be like coming from a place of like, these are little things you can do, and don't be hard on yourself because you can't do it right now, but you can build towards it. So I guess for me, the bite-sizedness of it is really, that's why I like to have the diversity of people I have on, because some people need to have the existential conversation. They need to look at it like, oh my God, like I am freaking the fuck out and I don't know what to do about this and I can't sleep. And now I listened to this interview that Patrick did with Dar Jamail, and now that makes me feel a little better. Okay, cool. Or like, I just need to know that I can do something. So, the Emma Catherine episode helped with that too. So for me, I just want to I want to look at it on the big scale, on the medium scale, on the small scale, and just see like people are coming at this subject around collapse, around, really big things, right? They're coming at it from different stages in their own acceptance process. And so certain things are going to attract them to my work particularly. And I hope that helps, because I'm interested in on all those different levels. Like, I'm not going to be contained. I'm not going to look at it just from one lens or one angle. I want people to, if they're coming at it from the big meta view, cool. But then we need to start thinking about what you can do right now to ground yourself psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, but also materially. So there are people that can talk about that. So for me, I guess I don't know if it's a bite-sized thing, but I just look at it and I see it all being a thread that leads to the same place, which is, how do we be in this time, a time of great uncertainty and ambiguity and confusion. And if anything that has, shown that, it's been just this last fucking year of like, how long is this goddamn pandemic going to continue? Oh, it's going to last probably a couple years. Oh, that's great. Oh, maybe this is just one of several, like that's scary, but like, you have to think about it day by day, moment by moment. And hopefully through these experiences that we're all having collectively, we can take steps forward just so that we don't lose our minds.
Right. Yeah. And you want to talk about affirmations at the beginning of the pandemic, March of 2019. My brother asked me,
March of 2020, you mean?
March of 2020. Sorry, March of 2020.
What year is it even?
It's been 5
Still
years,
2020.
Hasn't it? No, my brother asked me. He asked me, how long do you think this pandemic is going to last? And I said, realistically, like, do you want my real answer? And he was like, yeah, like 6 months, 3 months. I was like, no, man, this is minimum. We're looking at 2 years. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And every day, he's like, I'm going to buy you a coffee or something, because he didn't expect anything like this. He didn't realize that we weren't as resilient as we thought we were. And, I had been looking into collapse and looking at all the weak points and everything like that and just sort of come to my own conclusions. And then I get, that affirmation, and I felt fine, not fine. I guess I felt good that I was in the right mindset to start thinking about how to tackle these problems, but it made me feel terrible that I was right in this instance.
Yeah, and I think that there's no like fix-all. That's the thing, right? Is like the only thing you can really do is recognize certain things will happen. You don't know how they'll happen exactly, but having the right mindset helps a lot. But it doesn't stop you from feeling feelings.
Right.
It doesn't stop you from feeling sad or depressed or upset or you have grief or anger. Like it's not going to comfort you. It's just going to help you not completely shut down and go into a state of denial and lose your shit. And that's really important right now. We need to be able to build those. We need to have the ability to comprehend what's happening as it's happening and make the right decisions within the time that we have. And just to speak about the pandemic, like I had my own denial about that. Like I realized like as much as I talk about denial and trying to overcome denial about a lot of these things, no one is immune to these types of this way of thinking about things. Like I remember being in an international airport in like February of last year, flying back to the US and hearing on the intercom, anybody in mainland China in the last 2 weeks, please, we have to talk to you. Like step aside. Like, and I'm like, something's big is happening. I don't know. I think this is going to get weird. And then within a month of coming back to the States, lockdown, travel restrictions, wearing masks, like the whole thing. And I was in a state of denial about it at the time. I was like, oh yeah, this will be a few weeks. And I did not anticipate that really one of the worst things about this type of situation we're in currently is the public health situation is frightening and I don't want to get sick and I don't want other people to get sick and all of these things, but it's the way that people react to these situations. So as much as we got to prepare materially and psychologically and all this stuff, we got to expect that there's a lot of people who are not prepared and a lot of people are deeply invested in really toxic ideologies and ways of living and being. And that if that gets threatened or challenged in any way, they will lose their shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's a part of the picture too. And I wasn't sure about that until this last year. I'm like, oh, okay. So I think that's another aspect. We have to learn how to discern better, read into things better, find out who our allies and comrades are in this time. And that's a good place to start too.
Right.
Yeah.
I've only seen a panic response and a couple of fire alarms and fires that I've been in, but seeing the whole nation have a panic response to when they're, they got caught with their pants down. I think it was a combination of not being prepared and anxiety that the people who were supposed to be in power, they weren't prepared either. People just sort of freaked out. And I wasn't sure how far it was going to go before it sort of tapered out.
There's this Netflix series that I think was on some like cheapo, like Bravo knockoff type show. What's it called? Doomsday Preppers. It's like they find these people and they just like play them up to like the stereotype crazy people of preppers.
How have I not seen this?
It's so good. And so one thing that's really interesting is it'll be like, oh, I'm preparing for an EMP, and they like go through everything. And one of them is preparing for like a medical or a virus outbreak or something like that. And like at the end of every episode, to like quell the fears of the audience, they're like, experts say, the risk of a giant earthquake or whatever. And then the one on the medical experts, I just happened to see it like in January of last year. And it was like, experts say the chances of a medical or a virus or something taking hold are like 10% in the next 50 years, but the United States is well prepared and stocked and blah blah blah. And it's just like, it's so funny, like the arrogance. And like the show, like I've read that a lot of the people on the show were like trained to pretty much be insane, like a lot of those reality TV shows are.
You mean they were actors?
They weren't real
on
actors.
TV.
They were just like people that were kind of preppers, but then they were just like, hey, show us the craziest shit you got, and like just played it up. But it was just like really interesting, like the arrogance in the way they presented that information. And, now in retrospect, I think it was filmed in like 2010.
I gotta go watch that episode.
But yeah, so if you have Netflix and you got some time to kill and you want to feel better about the way you prep, that's a good one.
It's like that movie Contagion. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Contagion, and I watched that a few months ago, and it was eerily accurate in some ways, but the thing that they could not even anticipate, and this was the funny thing, is that there is like the snake oil salesman, like conspiracy theorist thing where he's like, I think he's played by like Jude Law or something in the movie, but he's just some blogger, right? He's just some blogger online saying like government's hiding all this information, and blah blah blah, and I have this solution, I have this snake oil I want to sell to like deal with this problem before the vaccines even come out. Turns out that Hollywood writers couldn't even imagine that the one like pitching the snake oil bullshit was actually going to be the president of the United States. Like they couldn't imagine that a fucking grifter con man would be the one to do that. Like that it would be a reality TV star, a former reality TV star. Yeah. You know what I mean? It just couldn't enter their imagination. It's just too outlandish. It sounded too crazy.
Yeah, no one would believe it.
I mean, truth is stranger than fiction has never fit more perfectly into a conversation.
Right.
Yeah. More and more I'm realizing some of these dystopian films and stories are great for maybe psychologically prepping people for some of these things, but even they can't really get their head around some of the shit that we're going through right now and are going to go through in the coming decades, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think this all kind of ties back to one of the things you talk about repeatedly in your podcast, the concept of mourning for both humanity and the planet. I was kind of curious how you define mourning in terms of, I guess, how it's evolved throughout this project for you and why you think that's so important for us to do.
Well, there's kind of two camps, I would say. Maybe there's more, but there's two major camps in the climate change. People that talk about climate disruption and all of the things I talk about. There's the people that are like us who kind of just accept certain inevitabilities and what's going to happen is going to happen. Certainly there's things we can do, but there's just certain things that are locked in. And there's something very tragic about that. And then there's the people that certainly believe in climate change and are a lot of them are scientists, a lot of them are people who are doing the hard work. Some of them are writers and so on, but they're like, please don't even address that part of it. We will figure it out. We do have tools available to us. Governments will come together to address this. This is an engineering problem, basically, right? There's geoengineering schemes we can work on. There's, a Green New Deal or something. There's always some thing that can help us get through this and we can fix this. And I think what's happening there is, and this is something that my friend Barbara Cecil says, is that there is something on the other side of grief. There is something on the other side of despair. And that we have to go through these processes in order to see that. And that there's actually, by giving up on hope, if I want to use that word hope a little bit, actually is a liberating process. Because then what can happen then is you begin to ask questions in a different way about what you can do. And you're not attached to an outcome as much. So do we really care about these things because we think we're going to win this battle against climate change? Like, we don't do this just because we think we can win. We do it because we love the earth, or we love the places we live. We love more than human life. We love our families. We love our friends. We love our communities. We don't do it because we think we're going to win. You don't just give up. And that's what these people that in the other camp tend to do, is they think if you even address the grief or despair that comes up when you address these things, it's going to lead to despondency, and people are going to become like hedonists or nihilists or something, and they're not going to do anything. And I'm like, yeah, that does happen, but that's not even really the majority of it. That, to me, it's all about how you frame it. It's all about how you address the subject. But I think, there is I don't know. I find these people that are optimistic for the sake of optimism to be really obnoxious and annoying.
Exhausting.
And I'm like,
unhelpful.
if you're in a cataclysmic event and someone just says, just think positively, you should slap them in the face, because I'm sorry, I'm going to try to get through this. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to fight like hell to make it through this thing. But don't pretend it's not what it is. Don't pretend it's something it's not. You know, there's something really kind of nefarious about that. It's like a form of gaslighting. And that, to me, actually hinders us from looking at it accurately, assessing the situation as it really is, and then asking the right questions out of that. So for me, yeah, I mean, what do you do with information that tells you that, well over half of all the wildlife in the world has disappeared in the past like 4 or 5 decades? What do you do with that information? What do you do with the fact that all the coral reefs are going to be gone within the next few years? What are you going to do with the fact that the sea ice in the summertime is going to be gone in the Arctic? You know, what do you do with the fact that sea level rise is destroying communities around the world, particularly indigenous communities in the global north and in the global south? Like, what do you do with that information and how it's going to affect you personally and those that you don't know? Like, that's grief. Like, what do you do with that? You can't pretend it's not there. And that is a really integral part of the whole process of dealing with it. And that's going to motivate people, I think, to make significant changes in how they live and how they treat other people. Like, just their personal relationships. Like, the fact is we're, regardless of all this shit, we're all going to die. You know, it's kind of ridiculous to think that this is going to last forever anyway. And when you have those moments, like, I don't know if you've like had those moments of like near death, or like you're like, oh shit, like someone I know is dying or is going to die. Like, all the bullshit fades away. You're much more intentional in how you communicate and how you act. And it brings a certain vitality and presence that you need. And I think that we can approach climate change and the inevitabilities of these things and the mourning and the grief and the despair that comes up with that can inform that. And that's important to me, because then people make decisions based in that place, and it could be very positive decisions. It also can go in a bad direction, and that's why we have to really work to build like resilient communities right now in order to address some of the inevitabilities that are going to come out of this global situation.
And I feel like in your last response and one earlier, I think you bring up this concept of defining your agency, like what you have control over, and sort of accepting the things that, you know, like you said, they're sort of inevitable. You can't really change those things. Just sort of accept them, and then have the foresight and the ability without distraction to focus on the things that you can affect.
Mm-hmm.
All of this, you know, you're talking about there's like these two camps, and that first camp that's kind of pie in the sky. Is there any hope for bringing them back to reality, do you think? Or is that just like their crutch?
I don't know. I think there's like layers of denial there. And I think part of it is like some of these people have like careers that they have. They're invested, like their egos are invested, they're financially invested. Like they have a certain amount of social capital and prestige that comes with that. Like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I don't know. Like, sometimes if they're okay, let's say it's not one of those people. Let's say it's not some prominent climate scientist or some writer or some person who writes for New York Times or whatever, right? It's just some average person. Yeah, you can have a conversation with them. I don't know how else to do that, but you just sort of like, hey, like, what do you think? And what do you think is going to happen when this and this happens? You know, like it's, I don't know. It's like the same thing with the pandemic. You know, you were talking to your brother about that, and he was like, it'll be a few months or a few weeks. You know, unfortunately, there's only one way that they'll understand certain things, and it's that, well, it just happens, and their whole worldview shifts. And we all have those experiences. Some of the biggest and most important lessons that we have in our life are kind of brought to us without wanting them to happen. Like, they just happen. You know, and I think we're collectively learning something right now, and we're being forced to address certain things. And I think we also kind of have to accept that a lot of people just aren't going to get it. And so we just do our thing, and we hope that when they wake up to it, however that is, they'll come to us, and we'll have the ability to help them on their path. That's all I got.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I feel
that's
like
all we can do, really.
Yeah.
I feel like deep down, there's this very primitive part of us that is very aware of what's happening and that something's wrong. And like I think we all feel it, and we're all just responding to it in different ways. It's just like I know a lot of older boomer hunter kind of guys, old school conservatives, and they'll tell you like, oh yeah, the climate, it doesn't snow like it used to. And then you're like, yeah, because of climate change. And they're like, no, it just doesn't snow like it used to. I'm like, it's there. I don't know what to do to just say, yes, this is the same thing, because it's so tied up in politics.
Yeah, it's really hard because it's like, you want to talk about like anarchism or socialism or any sort of leftist ideas, and you ask if you don't use any of those words, don't ever say leftism or anything related within that political spectrum. Don't say anything about that. And you just ask people, do people deserve certain things like clean water or like access to food or shelter or any of these things, right? And they're like, yeah, of course. Like, I'm totally on board. Well, what can we do to do that? And then they start naming things that are like so obviously like that's socialism or that's communism or whatever. But you can't say that word because it's a trigger and it's attached to this whole like thing. And it's the same for climate change. It's the same for so many other things. It's like people are seeing things, they're observing things, they're having experiences. They just don't have a framework to understand what it is. And I don't know what to do with that either. Like,
I'm just going to keep making podcasts about it.
Yeah, I guess. So just like keep on doing my thing, and you do your thing and we all do our thing. And
yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, I got tired of screaming at people, like literally screaming at people. So I figured I'd get a microphone and talk calmly.
Elliot's very good at that.
It seems to be getting a lot more positive reaction. So I'm going to stick with this for a little while.
Yeah, it's, sometimes it is fun or it can be useful to engage in heated discussions with people, but at a certain point you got to take care of yourself. You can't, like that isn't necessarily a good place to be all the time. Where
no,
you're just
man,
like
that vein in my forehead can only take so much pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, yeah, I feel that. Like I have to be careful. Like I don't get in arguments often with people. I'm a little conflict averse to a fault, which I'm working on, by the way. But, there's a place and a time where you absolutely have to stand up for your principles and beliefs and what you know to be true based on your understandings of justice and whatnot. And then there's a time and a place where it's not going to be fruitful and you just need to walk away, especially when you know that all the other person is doing is trying to get a rise out of you. And that's not useful for anybody. So, yeah.
No. Yeah. This conversation about climate change and collapse is so all-encompassing that it almost becomes hard to to even really focus on anything in particular within it, because of the fact that it is, we can't imagine what it will look like as we get into the heavy throes of climate change. We got a taste of it the past couple years between COVID and like what's happened in like Texas with the snowstorms and the government's impotence in dealing with anything. And I feel like I'm the only person that seems to think that the insurrection could have been so much worse so easily.
I
and
completely
I feel
agree
like
with you.
I feel like the left has done a poor job of taking it seriously, that we just kind of mock them for being a bunch of people that are crying that they didn't get what they wanted. But in reality, somebody climbed into a window with a gun. If they had shot somebody, our history, we would be in a very, very different place right now. And I don't think that can be understated, that all it takes is something as simple as that for the course of history to change significantly. Yeah. And like we don't have the systems in place to keep anything like that from being in check. And that goes back to this idea of the resiliency. And if climate change isn't bad now and it's already kind of fueling some of these issues, then what are we in for in the next 20 years? And 20 years isn't long. We're almost double that, and that it seems like a blink of an eye.
Well, I just want to say that I agree with you about the coup. It was a coup attempt. I just want to be very clear. That was exactly what it was. People want to downplay it and say it was an insurrection, and that's maybe an appropriate word. I don't know. It's a siege, whatever the fuck we want to call it. But that was a coup attempt. Liberal democracies are not structured or equipped to battle fascism. It's just not. So people believe these institutions we have are super resilient. People were not as worried as they should have been leading up to January 6th, after the election and the results and everything that Trump had done over the years and particularly over the last few months to say and instill in his cult following, his base, that the election will be fraudulent if he loses. There were so many red flags, and because of our myopic view of things in the United States, we could not imagine that what happens in so many other countries around the world would happen here. But just like every fucking empire before us, the war comes home. What we do to other places comes home. So what we're doing now is just to ourselves. It's amazing. Like, we're eating ourselves alive at this point. So when you think about climate change as well as an even bigger thing, you've got so many intersecting things happening. You've got rising fascism as a response to a lot of the things that are happening, connecting to climate change. Sorry, I just get overwhelmed. I think about all this, and this is why, like, I don't know if people wonder, but they're like, why is Patrick talking so much about fascism on his podcast right now? I thought it was about climate change. I'm like, you have to understand that fascists take advantage of crises to get into positions of power. And also we need to understand that they're going to use this subject of environmentalism or ecology or climate change. And, like some of the mass shootings, the white supremacist mass shootings we've had over the years have stated in each of their manifestos that, like, oh yeah, like, one of the reasons why we're having so many issues with the environment is because we're letting all of these hordes of brown people into our country. They're connecting white genocide as a bullshit idea, but they're connecting this idea of white genocide to environmental degradation. And this is being mainstreamed in certain ways by the Republican Party, not about the environment particularly, but they're starting to mainstream white genocide concepts. I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's rant recently on Fox News, but he's basically red-pilling millions of Fox viewers right now about shifting demographics affecting voters, which is essentially his way of introducing the idea of white genocide to the American population. So I'm talking about all these issues on my podcast because I'm like, we need to understand that the institutions we have not only are unable to address climate change adequately, but they're not going to be able to stop fascism from rising and taking control of these institutions. So it sucks. It's fucking horrifying, but I think January 6th was a wake-up call. And if people are forgetting what happened then we're living in a state of amnesia, and we need to not do that. This isn't going to go away just because we voted in a Democrat.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
We did a very kind of off-the-cuff episode during the summer where we did our election predictions, and
I'm not going to say we told you so, but
but we pretty much were like, if Biden somehow squeaks out a win,
Trump wasn't going to take it lying
Trump
down.
wasn't going to take it, and then
we didn't even know what we meant when
Yeah.
we said that until
And,
January 6th happened, but we knew it was going to be something. But again, like the Hollywood writers, like, we couldn't come up with that scenario that played out at all.
I might have actually. I think I might have. Not to call myself out, but
That's cool.
I'm
I didn't know
bullshit
what was
on
going to
that.
happen.
But one of the things we also talked about and ties into what you're saying, and the reason why I brought it up is because we both were like, well, even if somehow Trump doesn't overthrow the election results and refuse to step out of office, Biden is going to provide a framework to foment the right to have an easy target who the left is not going to fight for. And like it's giving 4 years for somebody like a Madison Hawthorne or somebody like that to step in and be a little bit more articulate, a little bit more polished, and still make those same cogent or same arguments in a more cogent way that makes it more digestible for middle class America that would agree with Trump if he wasn't so aggressive and rough around the edges.
Yeah.
While there is a component that liked him because of that, I think there's a much larger, a lot of the people that voted for Biden, those centrists supposedly, that would fall for somebody that was like, could speak like Mitt Romney, but said the same things as Donald Trump.
Yeah, I would say that that's true. I think Trump has fomented something. He's stirred up something. He created a really strong base. And whatever happens to Trump, whether he does run in 2024 or not, I don't know. I'm not sure what he really wants to do. I don't think he really enjoyed being president. But nonetheless, he may do it. Who knows? There are better politicians than him. There are people who know how to do this better than him. and they understand that he's created something, and they're like, we could really hijack this. This will work for us. And because of the way the Republican Party has, I think ultimately what they did after that event when Trump was impeached a second time, I think that just like, if what standard, like what would it take? What thing could the president possibly fucking do to get you to vote to impeach the guy? You know what? Or like to get him out of office. I mean, he was impeached, but he didn't get removed from office or face the consequences of that.
I mean, he did make the comment he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he'd still get elected. So
yeah, I mean, we're old enough.
That's setting the bar pretty high.
Yeah. We should have listened to that guy.
Right?
He wasn't joking. We thought he was joking. Like, wow, what an asshole! He's joking, and he was dead face serious to all of the American people when he said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're old enough to remember when Clinton was impeached. And now that just seems like
they should have given him a medal.
Fucking stupid.
Is that bad to say? Like what?
Like it seems so stupid in terms of like if that was impeachable, like how did we go from that to this not being considered impeachable by the entire Republican Party? I mean, I guess we're kind of going off on a tangent a little bit.
Sure.
But I think it all ties back into this conversation though about collapse. Like you're seeing that. I think the media likes to talk about that the parties are becoming more radical, and obviously that's not the case, but it does speak to the fact that we're existing where everything does feel more radical. And even for us on the left, the center feels more radical in the sense that it's further to the right. I think everything just feels magnified because there's this, like I said, there's this subconscious sense that things are falling apart, and we're all feeling it, even if we don't articulate it. And it's driving a lot of this like anxiety fueled like chaos.
Yes.
Yeah. The past 20 minutes just proves the point that we start with a overall all encompassing subject matter. Like this conversation was loosely based around climate change. And then we just, you try to pick a topic that you can kind of zoom into and take apart, and you realize it's, the scale zooms in and out, and it's connected to so many other different things that all touch on each other. And, I don't think we got overwhelmed, but there were so many different directions this conversation could have gone in, and it's all relevant.
Yeah, there's a lot to, that's why I love doing what I do, is because I can explore all these different, all my curiosities I can kind of explore them and go in different directions and understand that there's, connections to all of these things. And just a comment, I am, like I mentioned, I did 295 episodes. So when I reach episode 300, I'm going to do what I did with my 200th episode, which is go over the last 100 episodes and make like something of a compilation episode with like, I'm going to take like several segments of the episodes and then try to, this allows me, just for myself, selfishly, to like tie like, oh, here's the threads that I followed over the past year or two, or however long it's been I've been making these 100 episodes. So yeah, I just want to just say, the idea for me, I really am interested in how things are connected, and that it's not, I don't want to box myself in as far as like what I want to talk about, but most definitely it is about collapse. It is about awareness of collapse and how to be within that understanding, whatever that even means. But
that agency, right?
Yeah. So all this, one of the things I think that when we talk about post-collapse, we think about this idea of death, both literally and figuratively. And in that conversation, it's always tied with this idea of rebirth. And I want to know what your thoughts are in terms of, with all these conversations, how bad does climate change get? And in terms of, I guess, how we live through it, and what does that rebirth look like? Or is there a rebirth, or do we go back to being nomadic and wandering through the ruins looking for feral animals to eat?
I mean, the most extreme example of like what we could see is like The Road, I know that's a pretty extreme. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or read the book.
Read the book and seen the movie. It's good stuff.
Okay, yeah, it's a lot. It's really intense. I don't know how realistic that is, because that seems to me like a nuclear cataclysm that occurred, right? But That actually could be a part of the picture because we have all these nuclear reactors everywhere, and sea level rise could create. I don't know. There's a lot of things a lot of variables to consider about the ways in which we all could go extinct from all this. But I've been thinking about rebirth. In part, I've been thinking about it for a while, of course, but I don't know. I did an interview with a writer named Ramon Ilani, and he had a book come out called Weird Against the Modern World, and I have an interview that'll be coming out with him probably early next month publicly. But he talks a lot about modernity and how modernity is this process of this idea of like linearity, like we're constantly progressing and moving forward, and our conception of time is profaned versus sacred time, which is cyclical. You know, there's always a return. There's always life, death, rebirth. It's always like moving in cycles. And that's how the universe operates. That's how the earth operates. And that's how we operate as the organisms of this on this planet. And by trying to break out of that, we're doing something that just is an affront to that natural process. So I really think it's possible that human beings will not survive in the next century. It's very possible. I don't know if that's true. I can't be certain, but that's something that has driven me to do what I do because I thought that was kind of something that one of the conclusions I had from reading about climate disruption. But that doesn't mean I know that. I don't know. And so what can we do to step out of that linear way of understanding things and understand that the collapse, as it were, that's happening and all of this is actually about returning to a cyclical process. So just like all things, our civilization is dying and should die. And we will then see new things come out of that. Something will be birthed. It may not be definitely won't be within our lifetimes. It's an intergenerational thing. But nonetheless, like, what can we do right now to create the conditions for future generations to be able to live a healthy and live in a reciprocal and regenerative capacity with the earth? I think that should be the thing that we have to think about right now. So how we grow food, how we relate with the land, how we relate with one another, like all of these things, like that is what we should be focusing on. So I think of the work of I have interviewed him several times and I really love the man. His name is Joe Brewer. Him and his family live in Baricara,
I listened to those episodes.
Yeah, and he's like really working to build regenerative hubs. Like how can we regenerate the land here right now and then build networks that are bioregional in their structure? Like how do we as human beings in our capacity as human beings work to regenerate, like not as just in a sustainable way, because sustainability is just like do no harm, but you're not really contributing either. Regeneration is like not only are we doing no harm, but we're actually contributing to the health of other living things and other living systems. So whatever comes out of all of this, I think it's going to be decentralized communities. It's going to be based on, it's going to have an ecological framework. It's going to think about how can we live in a way that's going to be beneficial to us currently, but also to future generations. How do we reduce trauma? How do we reduce like all of these things that are in our systems right now? That to me is what a rebirth is going to look like, if at all, and it's going to be a multi-generational process. So again, without being attached to an outcome, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but what can we do where we're at right now to, save what's already, like what can we do to save what's already here? So what old growth forests can we still protect? What other ecologies can we protect right now? And who do we have to fight to protect those things? And what kind of tactics can we engage in to do that? That's a big part of it too. So yeah, I guess I don't know if that answers your question adequately, but to me, yeah, like regeneration and the idea of rebirth is just accepting that things are going to die and fall away. Those are going to be real things, like those we love, people, other forms of life, but also just the way that we think about things, because they don't serve us anymore. And they never served us, honestly, but they definitely don't serve us any longer, and they're going to die away too. And that's okay. And so there's just sort of a somber kind of acceptance of some of these things, and then, try to act based in that place.
Sure. That's the mourning you were talking about. And then, you take that agency and you take your whatever you have control over and you do what you can to tackle the problems that are in front of you.
Yes.
That's all we can
Basically.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all we can do.
Yeah.
So, doesn't sound like much, but damn, is it hard.
Oh, it's very hard. And I mean, I can talk about this as much as I want, and I do talk about it a lot. But for me to do it personally is really fucking hard. So, like, I'm not. I have an ideal that I talk about, but doesn't mean I know how to match that ideal. And that's just human, and we're all figuring things out, and we're all trying to deal with so much in our personal lives, and we're just trying to survive half the time. So don't cut yourself enough slack that you don't do anything, but also cut yourself enough slack to know that you're just a human being trying to survive in an incredibly ridiculous system that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah,
So
it's
just
absolutely
give yourself
absurd.
a little bit of
Kind
a
of
break,
crazy. Kind of crazy sometimes, all the time, every day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Patrick, this was really great. I appreciate your thoughts. Do you have anything else if people are interested in
Anything
your
you
work?
want to plug?
I mean, my podcast, you can learn more on my website, lastborninthewilderness.com. That's the good place to go. I had a book published last year called We Live in the Orbit of Beings Greater Than Us. That was published through Gods and Radicals Press. You can learn more on my website or at abeautifulresistance.com, I believe, .com. Gods and Radicals Press, you can look that up and you'll find it there. But yeah, that's it. Just check out my podcast. I would appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm sure they will. We'll plug it a couple more times. I know
Okay.
I've got a backlog to get through, and I am interested in the book, so it's on my list.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
So as always, if you enjoyed the episode, please give us a review on iTunes, which heavily impacts our outreach to new listeners and helps us bring on new and exciting guests. We appreciate your support, and we hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for listening to the Poor Proles Almanac. This is Elliot.
And this is Andy.
Signing off. We'll see you guys later.